Hi everyone. Okay, this is a video for people who maybe are just getting started with drawing and yet you like to doodle, or people who love patterns and want to kind of develop a habit, I guess you would say. They want to incorporate patterns into the things, their art journal pages and the things they draw, and the kind of supplies that you can use to kind of kickstart both a practice or a habit of using pattern, but also if you're not really comfortable with watercolor but you want to learn watercolor, this is a good little practice. You can do this as like a little daily practice. Sometimes I do this on just a blank page without any kind of a drawing at all, and I'll show you a little something about that as well. But first off, I want to talk about the supplies that you can use that will really help make patterning turn into something more than just a doodle. So look for pens, go through your stash, so to speak, and look for pens and markers that are not permanent. So things that when you add water to them, they will move, and you can basically watercolor with ink that way. So for me, I have found that I'm more inclined to use patterns or to want to incorporate them or create them when I have materials that are not permanent. And I think you should always kind of know the stuff that you have in your studio, what's permanent and what's not. That helps you if you're doing especially art journaling, mixed media work. You know when you can or should incorporate a particular ink or marker and when you shouldn't. So if you know you're going to be putting water or paint over it, then you probably want something permanent if you don't want it to move around. If you do want it to move around, you don't want to use a permanent Sharpie pen, because it's not going to move for you. So I'm going to do a pattern with each of these. I picked out 5 because I think having 5 things that you can draw to create a pattern with in your repertoire is a really great place to kind of start. And I think you can go on Pinterest and look up patterns, look up, the name of it always escapes me, but the repeating pattern, darn it, it's right there, but I can't think of it anyway. Zentangling, that's it. Look up Zentangling, because there's tons of Zentangling patterns that you can choose from. And you can also get ideas from looking at stencils. I actually started making patterns back because I started designing my own stencils. As many of you who've been long-term subscribers or viewers to this channel, you know I used to sell my own stencils. And I kind of started getting interested in making my own patterns for 2 different disparate reasons. I was in a group that did a lot of Zentangling. That was A, and then B was that I was developing my own, or wanting to develop my own stencils. There was a time where every single art journal page I made started with spray ink and stencils, and that was like, spray ink was king for me for the very longest time. Now I can make entire art journal pages and never even get a stencil out or a spray ink, which is amazing to me. But that's kind of where I started, and I've just kind of honed that over time. And gotten more and more comfortable with developing little patterns that I can just, that I really enjoy and can make all the time. And I think it's good to practice making both large and small versions of it. So for instance, one of the things, if you've been around this channel for a while, is that I love to draw this kind of loose petaled, kind of messy flower, and then often I will put these, little drawn lines in them. You see them in all of my pages. Yeah, I've probably been doing these for 7 or 8 years now, and I haven't gotten tired yet. And then I also, like to make this a smaller version and just, usually just leave the lines out. This isn't anything like fancy. I think a million people probably doodle little tiny flowers. It's not anything like, special to me, other than the fact that I do it all the time. Whereas other people might get bored and move on to other pattern types. than sticking with the same one all the time. I'm going to just do a few of these because I want to turn it into like a more recognizable pattern that looks like it's actual patterning and not just random, doodles here and there. So I often pattern clothing, hair. I've even been known to do patterns on faces, kind of like little tattoos or that type of thing. But one of the ways that I have found that I can take a pattern that I love, use an ink that's not, that's water soluble, and practice watercolor. I'm using a small, I think this is probably like a size 4 or a size 6 round from Princeton, I believe. There's no writing left on it, so I just have to try to guess. So these gold shadow pens from Jelly Roll from Sakura, they will bleed. The color will bleed out if you get them wet, especially if you get them wet when they haven't dried yet. So just going around the edges of them, you pick up enough, touching, just kind of gently touching the edge, you pick up enough of the ink that it starts to kind of bleed out and become almost like a paint. And then you can basically negative paint around the doodle that you made. This will give you practice both with getting comfortable with seeing what interesting effects will happen from the ink, which is, really similar to a lot of the interesting effects you get with watercolor. But it also teaches you just the act of practicing going around all of your shapes. It teaches you better brush control and better water control. You start to learn how much water you actually, kind of need to get the ink moving and not to over flood it and have, a little too much ink to the point where you can't even see your flowers anymore or whatever your pattern is. So this is, a combination of skill sets that you're kind of practicing as you go. You're developing your own little patterns, and you're getting better brush control. You're getting more comfortable with watercolor. I see a lot of people post that they want, that they love the look of watercolor and they want to paint with it, but they just, they're not comfortable with the lack of control they feel they have, or they just feel kind of overwhelmed. So this is a really good way to kind of practice your skills and get a little more comfortable with working with a product that you have to let go of control of. That's not easy to say. So those little flowers are one of my favorite things to pattern. And another pen, well, this is technically a marker, but the Tombow markers are, they're water soluble even after they're dry. So are these Jelly Roll Sakura. These are the gold shadow, I think they're called. Anyway, those are will still reactivate after they have dried. So will these Tombow markers. So another pattern that I do quite often is just a really simple diamond pattern. And I will say keeping it as simple as you can is actually really helpful and beneficial for you. I'm not doing a really good job with my diamonds today here. I have good diamond days and not so good at diamond days. I really love simple geometric shapes anyway. I'm very fond of, and that includes circle shapes as well. So, not just pointy things or square things, but also round doodles. It's really simple. It's not a super complicated thing to practice, and yet it can be quite impactful, especially as patterning a small area. So here I've done them, a little big or a little medium sized, but I do often also, especially if I'm doing something like patterning clothing, I'll do them really small. and it looks just as impactful and effective as a tiny pattern as it does as a large pattern. Again, I like to have a few handy, little patterning things that I can do big or small, and you just practice them enough that they become like you don't even have to think about painting with them or drawing them. It just comes really natural, and that can be really great when you are in the middle of working on an art journal page and you suddenly are like, I don't have any ideas, I don't know what to do next. You know what I mean? Those little diamonds can really kind of come in handy, and you can do squares, diamonds, rectangles, any shape that you can think of that you can repeat is a good candidate for becoming part of your personal little collection of repeating patterns that you can use to fill in areas. So again, I do them big and tiny. They're super fun and easy. And again, using an ink that you can move around means that you get instant, you can instantly fill an area with awesome color, and it looks more detailed than just painting, this, turquoise. That would be it. But here it suddenly has like all kinds of things to look at. Makes it much more interesting visually. So I picked up these pens a really long time ago, and they're actually only just now starting to run out, and I've been using them for a couple of years now. These are the 4A roller balls. Now, a few of the colors don't bleed out very well, but most of them do at least a little bit. And for these, I'll just do a really simple, kind of like a flower type of, it's not a flower, that's the beauty of it. And it can be very small, so I'll do some small ones. And it's just it's just a set of circles, and I just make them really messy, and I make all of them, equally messy, and that's kind of what makes them interesting to look at, even though they're, otherwise just kind of simple little circles, but they're all the same. So they're like a little family. I'll just do a couple more. Messier the better. And then we'll do like a really big one, because this, again, just like all my other patterns, I try to do them where they will work super small and super big. Oop, and these pens, as they start to run out of ink, they start to skip a little bit. But since I like to make it look messy, that actually isn't a negative, it's still a positive. And then, yeah, you can make these really tiny. And again, oops, just like with the other patterns that I've made and the pen choices that I've made, these bleed out. So you can fill an area pretty quickly with just a nice little pattern like this, without having to put a lot of thought into it, other than the fact that you are repeating a pattern that you're comfortable with because you've practiced it a bit. And I think 5 is a good number to kind of get yourself started with. By no means do you have to limit yourself to 5. I have way more than 5 patterns that I like to do all the time. But 5 is helpful, I guess, or beneficial. Another thing that I like to do is once it's kind of dry, you can come back in with the same pen, and you can add another pattern back into it or over it or with it. So I like to do these little scan lines, that's what I call them. They're just a filler. But I do like to incorporate them. And if you needed to pull your pattern out a little further to fill an area that maybe you want a little more color in, or an area that maybe you can't quite fit your little pattern into, this is a good way to do that because it's using the same pen, so it's going to give you the exact same ink color. So we'll come in now and just give these a little bit of water. The more you brush over it, the more it's going to kind of disappear. So that's another thing you can play with. So you can make it disappear more or less depending on your needs. And it also does depend on the particular pen that you're using, because some pens will bleed more than others, and some will, the lines will stay. Like here we're like lifting up like the top layer of the ink, but the under layer doesn't wash away as easily. You can though, like if you keep at it, you can really fade them out. And I'm doing this, by the way, on mixed media paper. This is not watercolor paper. It does just as well, if, you know, probably looks a little bit better if you do it on actual watercolor paper. Okay, everyone I think pretty much knows about the Elegant Writer. There's several classes online about this particular pen, and it is made by Speedball. This is one that I don't use them all that often. I kind of like, you know, the more single colors. These are sometimes a surprise as to what you're going to get, but I do, you know, they are something that you can easily get beautiful effects with. So another really easy, super simple pattern, and probably the very first patterning that I ever really did, was just multiple sizes of circles. It sounds so easy and so simple, and it is, and yet you can really fill an area very quickly by using this. Whoops. And you can make it look quite random, and you can do big and little, and they all work really well together, or separately, you know, doing them all one consistent size. And I think most art journal artists, you know, kind of are fans of the circle filler sort of pattern. So, and then again, like I said, you get interesting results with these. I know there's like a technical explanation of what colors you get out of them, and I think it has to do with, I think Jill was telling me the other day, or someone was telling me, that it has to do with they changed the ink formula at some point, and so older ones you get different colors. I have a couple of different random ones that I bought just when I was at the store, and then I have a full set that I bought online, and I do have different blacks that give me different colors. So I can't tell you though what the specifics are about it, but there are like details about it. I don't know what they are. You can also, instead of going around the outside, you can do the inside as well. Just dropping a little bit of water into them. and you can incorporate the two looks by going around the outside of some where you're not filling in the center, if that makes sense. But again, great filler, you know, for a full area without it being just completely empty. A great way to make art if you like to doodle, you know, but you're not, I mean, there are just some people who just don't like to draw like faces or flowers or things, but they still want to make pretty pages and they want it to have a hand-drawn appearance. That's another, you know, really good way to get that is just with doodling. And then finally, these are the Flair, Papermate Flair, and these bleed really lovely. When I want to fill an area, so like I'm going to fill this area right here. When I want to fill an area, sometimes I just don't want to stick to a single image or you know, pattern, but I want it to kind of have that sort of feel of a pattern. I'll just do random things. I honestly think about making mandalas when I'm doing these. So like this is a shape you always see on a mandala. You just always see that shape for some reason. So I'll start with like that shape and then maybe I'll do something like this. And maybe I'll put in a circle. And you just make them so that they're thick. So I'll do a kind of like a diamond. Running out of ideas for shapes suddenly. I don't know why I can't think of anything else my mind's blank, so I'll just do another diamond. Who knows? Oh, I know a good filler shape is just a semicircle. Okay, so here I'll do that. So when you do something like this, you know, on its own, it doesn't really look all that impressive, I guess is a good word. But when you go in and you paint around it, because the ink will bleed, because it will fill that area with color, it becomes so much more than it was and so much more interesting. And again, like I said, this definitely teaches you kind of brush control and water control, because you can kind of tell when you have added, you know, a little too much water on your brush and it kind of obliterates your whole design, and when you don't have enough, you don't get very much bleeding from the ink, and you have to add more. So a lot of great skills can be developed from a practice like this. And if you're someone who does use watercolors and you find yourself, I see this a lot too, having to get out like the colored pencils and things like that in order to paint details, because you're just, you know, aren't comfortable doing it with a brush, this is an awesome practice for getting better at working with small details. And it's not that you're going to do it perfect every time or anything like that. I make mistakes. I like grip the brush too hard or not hard enough, or I get to talking and I start flinging the brush around and make a mess out of it. I do all the time myself. Or I just am being, not paying close enough attention and I brush over an area that I shouldn't have. But I will say that my brush control always seems to improve after I have, spent a little time practicing in this way. I notice improvements in my brush control. And, brush control, I think it's like riding a bicycle. If you haven't ridden a bicycle in a long time, you get on the bicycle and you're like not doing so good. You weave a little bit or something. But after you've been riding your bike again for a few weeks, suddenly you're like a pro again. I think that painting really detailed areas and doing it, in a way in which you can get all those details without having to use pencils or things of that nature. I think that just comes from a lack of practice and a lack of patience with yourself and your brush. Did I get all the areas? Yeah. So you can see how, it looks much more impactful now because it has that color around it. You can also layer colors. That is usually pretty, it looks pretty good too. So like in this case, I'll do, let's see, I'll do some little flowers. I'll do 2 in the blue and 1 or 2 in the green. Oops, it's skipping. It's running out. What will I do? I can't. I tried to buy more of them, but so far I've only found them in packs of like red, black, and green or something. But these have like lovely pinks and purples, and I haven't seen them since then in those variety of colors. So you can definitely mix colors, which looks pretty awesome. Camera's going in and out. I forgot to turn the autofocus off before I started filming, so if it's been fuzzing out like that a lot, I apologize. This camera is really sensitive on its autofocus. And yes, you can color mix doing this. I'll show you in a moment a fun color mix that you can do. I'll stop here. But you can see how you can get lovely watercolor effects without actually using watercolors. So if I take a light pink, I've got a couple of different pinks. Let me try, I think it's these two. Let me try these right here. First, let me turn this. So we'll just do little squares. Oops, I keep putting my hand in that wet ink right there. I can't remember which of the pinks and the yellows because I have several of them. But if you mix pink and yellow and or pink and green, you often get a flesh tone that you can use. I'm going to try both because I can't remember which ones work the best. Here's my brush. So you can see how you're getting a little flesh color right there. By mixing the two. This one might be, it's a little strong on the purple on that one, so I'm not sure. Either one though will give you a nice flesh color. And pink and green, this is not the right green because this green goes too dull. I have a different green, I guess, is the one I've been using. But you do still get a purpley sort of flesh color out of that one. Let me get a different green. It might be this one. Try these two together. And then I'll add this darker pink over here. So this is the green and the lighter pink. Yeah, this is the more of a flesh color right here. So I'll paint it out. So you can definitely mix your markers together or pens and create combination colors. That darker pink goes more of a like a shadow, a nice flesh shadow color, but it's a little on the green side. I only did one little circle of the pink though. Anyway, you can definitely combine your marker colors or ink colors together as well. So I hope that for those of you who've been really interested in my patterning and kind of wanted somewhere, like an idea of where to start or how I got started doing this. This is kind of how I got started doing it, was just playing. Absolutely any of these things that I've done here would look awesome on clothing, awesome as just, being able to give your pages some details. A lot of the times, like if I do collage or things like that, I might end up with areas that I want to just add a pop of interest into. And maybe it's even like an irregular shaped area. My dryer is going off, scared me. And a regular shaped area, but I really want to kind of give some visual interest to it. I'll grab a pen that I know I can move around with water, and I'll do a little pattern in that area. So this can be really awesome to put into your repertoire, to just develop a handful of patterns that you really like making, that you don't get too bored with. Making them repetitively, and then it can be awesome brush practice and help you to get a little bit more comfortable with working with watercolor, because ink obviously is very similar to watercolor. It has kind of the same behaviors as far as practice using it and putting it together. Also too, it is really nice when you combine colors. And also when you come back in and layer more color over. So i.e. For instance, let me get a blue. So if I have this area here and maybe for some reason I want to punch it up a little bit or cover some of it up, do something different maybe, I can come in and do a totally different patterned item. So I'm just doing a flower. So this is great for again, those pages where you might have collage or other things going on, and you've got an area that you kind of don't like, but you don't really want to, use acrylic paint and paint the whole thing out. You can just kind of come in and put something new over that area. Now, clearly it doesn't work so well if you do, like, you try to put this over like something dark black or something like that, because the color's not really going to show. But if you want to kind of add color over, add an image, almost kind of like obliterating this, that's a nice way to go about doing that. And if you do that over and over again, it just gets more and more visually interesting. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching. I've gone on a little longer than I planned to, but hopefully it will still be interesting all the way through for those of you who watched it all the way through. And if you did, thank you so much, and I will see you around the internets.